But who was quickest through Copse Corner on that last phase of Q3? Max Verstappen. Not a massive amount of downforce in the car. He was quicker than both McLarens through Copse. What does that tell you about Max Verstappen? Good saying, well, they got to make a change. Well, what change? They want a better car. What are you going to do? Buy a McLaren or something? You know, it's easy to say, oh, you got to have a change at Ferrari. They're not doing very well. But bottom line is they chose this path. Work with it now. It's ludicrous to say, oh, you got to go to Mercedes because there's a great warm feeling there, and Toto and Fangio and Lewis and all the rest of it. Nico Rosberg, got to go there, Max, because nobody knows what Mercedes is going to be like in 2026.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me as always, my friend and yours, the go-to for all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Always embarrassed to hear that intro, but anyway, nice to see you, Cameron.
Yeah, it's compulsory at this stage, Peter. That they will come for me. I will get cancelled if I say anything.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Windsor, let's talk some F1 on the back of the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, round 12, the 75th anniversary of F1. What do you think was the biggest story?
Well, several big stories, weren't there? So in order to define the biggest, I suppose you have to think about what will carry forward, not only this year, maybe into the next decade, whatever. Because it was a big race, wasn't there? There's a lot going on. It's a crazy race, really, in many ways. And there were so many subplots to it. I'm sure we'll be talking about some of those today, this morning. I don't know. For me, probably it was Oscar's reaction to the news that he had the penalty, and then having, without too much time to think about it, serving the 10-second penalty in the pit stop, and then back in the race, realizing that all of that was wrong. I'm not saying that he didn't deserve some sort of penalty for what happened behind the safety car, but the procedure was wrong, because had they left the penalty till after the race, there might have been some time to discuss it. On the stewards report, we had no input at all from Oscar or McLaren as to actually what happened there. And for Oscar to be relatively miffed, calm guy that he is, obviously there is another side to that story, but it was all then too late. And Oscar's reaction, I thought, was great, which was, well, that wasn't very good, was it? Why don't we just reverse positions now and race to the finish, and we'll sort it out afterwards? And I thought, wow. I mean, we know he's a racer, but what a racer. There's no way McLaren were going to wear that, of course, because on one side it would have meant Lando driving flat out, and it would have meant Oscar driving flat out, and it would have been, playing with fire. So it's obvious that they were going to say no to that. But I thought it was quite interesting that he had that. And depending on how the championship works out at the end of this year, that could be a pivotal moment, either in the way Oscar approaches the rest of the year. In other words, okay, heads down now, no more prisoners, or whether it's Lando thinking, I've got everything on my side now. The team, luck, the weather, everything works for me. It's all done. I'll relax. It'll be interesting to see. I think based on how the championship does work out, I think that moment will be quite an important moment.
10-second penalty, Mr. Windsor. Too harsh or justified? Well, was that a dangerous move from Oscar, given the fact that his pressure on the brake pedal, 59.2 psi? A lot of people are comparing it to George and saying, well, if you didn't give George anything at the Canadian Grand Prix, then how can we plead consistency and robust governance as far as the FIA if we give Oscar a 10-second penalty for doing something very similar?
Well, this is another question, isn't it? I mean, obviously, as I say, we haven't heard, or I haven't heard, Oscar's absolute response to that, sitting calmly, explaining why he did that. We haven't heard that. And there may be a mitigating circumstance. And it's possible there will be, based on the way he did react, knowing, Oscar, the good bloke that he is. So, but so far as the penalties go, I think it's a complete mess. And it's not good enough for the FIA to say, well, everybody's complaining about the penalties, so what we're going to do now, aren't we wonderful? We're going to make it all visible now. So there are no more excuses. Everybody can see what the crimes are and what the penalties are. As if that, well, what that is just washing their hands of the whole thing. Because then it comes down to the old Ralph Schumacher thing of, "You're not very quick this weekend, Ralph." "Ah, yeah, but we were not expecting to be quick," as if that's an excuse, and it's the same thing. "Oh, yeah, this is a ridiculous penalty." "Oh, well, that's what it says in the guidelines. You guys have got it as we've got it." The problem is the whole business of penalties is ludicrous, in my opinion. And secondly, the guidelines, as they're drawn up, are pretty ludicrous as well, because there's so many grey areas in everything in Formula One, in racing in general, in racing and rallying in general. And to start having black and white rules like this that the stewards have to be seen to be adhering to is insane, in my opinion. And it's ruining Formula One. And for a good example of what I'm saying is the penalty that Oliver Behrman was given for making a mistake. And there's no doubt he made a mistake. It was a misjudgment. He shouldn't have been going that quickly on cold brakes, cold tires, especially with the track red, coming into that very long entry to the pit lane at Silverstone. And he got a 10-place grid penalty for that, which is a lot, bearing in mind he qualified in Q3, got into Q3 and probably the best single qualifying lap he ever drove. And it's all just completely destroyed. And the week before, Kimi Antonelli basically does exactly the same thing, cold tires, cold brakes, and goes into the second corner of the race. This is a different thing altogether. Takes out Max Verstappen, could have taken out several more cars, and only gets a 3-place grid penalty the following race. Now, to me, what Kimi did was much worse than what Oliver Behrman did. Oliver did it on his own. He actually paid a penalty, which was he crashed the car, which is not very good. And it was rebuilt, as we know. But there's your penalty in a way. I mean, this is Q3, this is FP3, and he does it coming into the pit lane, and he gets a 10-place grid penalty. I think that is absolutely ridiculous if you compare it with the penalty that Kimi Antonelli got. And that's where it's all going wrong. And if they're so pedantic about the red, just have a speed limit. As soon as the red comes out, everybody has to go down to a speed limit as if it's the pit lane. Why don't they do that? The fact that they don't do that and they leave a little bit of judgment to the drivers means, as I say, there's grey area here. And yeah, they can relate it to what he was doing the previous lap and all that rubbish. Why don't they just have a speed limit, make it very clear that once the red's out, everybody does the speed. And if you go over it by 1 kilometer, you're out, or your penalty or whatever. There's so many things you could tidy up. And so, and I think another one is this 10-second penalty thing, whether it should be a stop-go, whether it's up to the teams to decide if it's a stop-go or at the end of the race. That's a very powerful tool in the hands of the team, because and the FIA for that matter, because if it's a stop-go, damage is done. At least there's the chance to talk about it after the race. And that's another issue. You could come in from 30,000 feet and watch that Grand Prix and think, what's going on here? The guy's leading the race. He was leading Lando throughout. He's behind the safety car. Nobody touched. There were no accidents. And he gets a 10-second penalty. It's quite difficult to explain that to people that don't know that much about Formula One and don't remember what happened in the 2007 Japanese Grand Prix between Lewis and Vettel and all that stuff, which is where that rule all started from. And so I just think, we've got far too many penalties, far too many potential crimes out there, not enough clear thinking, not enough understanding of what the sport is all about. And I could go on and on and on. I could talk about all the sporting regulations for what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do under braking, if you're the car in front or the car behind. All that is nonsense. It's created by people who don't really understand motor racing. And here they are. The FIA have now basically said, "Oh well, nothing to do with us. These are the rules. These are the crimes. These are what we're going to do. The penalties. So don't blame us." And that's wrong.
It's incredible, Peter, that the morning after, I'm going through Article 55.15 and reading out verbatim: in order to avoid the likelihood of accidents before the safety car returns to the pits, from the point at which the lights on the car are turned out, drivers must proceed at a pace which involves no erratic acceleration or braking, nor any other manoeuvre which is likely to endanger other drivers or impede the race start. What I don't understand, Peter, again, you've alluded to the point, I don't understand, where is the consistency here? If Oscar did that, then how did George not do that at Canada? It's insane. Well, it's all,
again, trying to apply that regulation blanket like from one race to another, it doesn't work. And maybe the stewards got it right, but to the general public, it looks inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and they've got to stop this. Well, they won't. They won't stop it. In fact, they'll put even more regulations in and even more penalties. Believe me, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because too many people are making money out of writing all this stuff, and lawyers are involved and everything else.
Speaking of the FIA, Mr. Windsor, before we come to all of the other F1 centric threads as far as British Grand Prix is concerned, Tim May has announced that he's set to run for the FIA presidential elections in December.
Who has?
Is Tim Mayer the solve, do you think, Peter? Do you think he can not fix for all of this? I'm not casting him even as a panacea, but do you think he'll be better than Mohammed bin Salman?
I've got a massive amount of respect for Tim Mayer and for the Mayer family. I'm probably one of the few people on the planet Earth who actually saw his uncle, Timmy, racing in the Tasman Series in '64, just before he was killed. Unbelievably talented driver. And I've spoken to Tim, the Tim that we know and love, many times about that. And his dad taking him to the Mexican Grand Prix and remembering that. Of course, he's the son of Teddy Mayer, who was one of the founders of McLaren with Bruce. So he's got an amazing pedigree. He's got a very good brain. He's very calm. I'd love to see him as FIA president. I think he'd do a brilliant job. The problem remains that because of Bernie and Max and the way they exploited the system, which was in place, but nobody had ever used it before, in order to become FIA president, you've got to do a massive amount of global work in order to get the votes of every single country, and it's one vote per country. So, whether you're spending time in the Ivory Coast or the United States, they both carry the same weight. And that's, that costs a lot of money. And money in italics. So, whether Tim Mayer's got that, I don't know, has anybody got the energy that it requires to go and do that, other than people who are incredibly ambitious and spend all their time on it 24/7? Then, there's no way Carlos Sainz would do that. There's no way Ari Vatanen was going to do that. I doubt whether Tim Mayer will do that. I think he will imagine that there will be a popular vote and be relatively democratic, but I don't think it is. But I'd love to see him as president. Of course I would.
I think a lot of us would, Mr. Windsor, given that Mohammed bin Salman ran on robust governance and transparency, and since 2022, when he picked up the F1 presidential mantle, I would argue that FIA have been nothing if not the opposite of the aforementioned transparency and robust governance. But I digress. I shouldn't be so critical.
Yeah, but I mean, what is transparency? I mean, it's one of these catchwords of the era, isn't it? What does it mean? It means, well, we're going to tell you what we're going to do, so therefore it's okay to do it. That's what transparency means. It's nonsense. Intelligence and logic and respect for the heritage of the sport, they're much more important than transparency, whatever that means. And so, yeah, that platform was flawed from day one, in my opinion.
Yeah. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Back to the British Grand Prix circumstance. Was this Lando Norris's coming out party, as so many Lando Norris fans have cast it, or was Lando Norris gifted a race victory because of an uncharacteristic Max Verstappen mistake and an Oscar Piastri error of judgment?
I think he would have beaten Max for sure. So I don't think that was an issue. Obviously, he was gifted it by the penalty given to Oscar Piastri, and you could call it a Piastri mistake, although we don't yet know really what happened from Oscar's point of view. Yeah, I mean, the momentum swung big time. And there was a moment, as I say, when Oscar was saying, this is what I think we should do, swap positions, race to the finish. And McLaren said, no. And that's, as I say, that could be a huge, huge point as we go towards the second half of the Formula One season. So in that sense, yeah. And I think Lando deserved to win because he was where he needed to be when it all went wrong for Oscar. And even though he got he got beaten in qualifying, which was not good in front of his home crowd, he was pretty chilled and calm and relaxed afterwards, which was good, I think. And even though, Oscar was quicker in the early laps of the race and getting away from him, he nonetheless found his groove, and he didn't let it become a big gap. And he was with it all the time. And there was parts of the circuit where he was quicker than Oscar, things he was doing in the car better than Oscar. Many parts of the lap where Oscar was better than Lando, but Lando kept at it. And Whether this will be the pivotal moment of him going on to win the championship obviously remains to be seen. I think if you see this as a bracket, Austria and Silverstone, it's a pretty big moment for Lando Norris. And my hope from a Lando perspective is that he doesn't allow this now to get on top of him, and he uses this to become really, really focused on his side of the garage. As I said all along, try to get away from all the fluorescent green and all the branding and all the social media, and just focus hard and fast on his side of the garage, because Oscar Piastri for sure is not going to go away. And his job always is to out-qualify Oscar and to out-race him every race from here on. And that is not easy in a McLaren, in a car as good as a McLaren. And I think the other takeaway from this, and I would put it almost level with that moment, that political moment, if you like, the intra-team politics. I think the other moment from Silverstone is that McLaren, like everybody else, were looking at the weather forecast on Saturday and seeing that there was a pretty good chance the sun was going to be shining by 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock UK, when the race started. But nonetheless, thinking, we've got such a great car here, we might as well put on more wing in order just to make sure that if it is wet and they get it wrong, and in England it's quite changeable, we've got a great race car. And guess what? If it's dry, we've still got a race car that's capable of finishing at least second, if not probably beating Max over a race distance, or the Ferraris for that matter, or the Mercedes, because of our better time management. And so that, I think that showed how good the McLaren is, that McLaren could afford to take that gamble, if you like, and know that the worst that was going to happen was that they were going to have to do a tire management race in the dry with less top speed, but obviously hopefully with the help of DRS, and still win the race. And who else could take that? None of the other teams. They all had to say, right, you want a quick car for the dry, or do you want to cover it with wing and make sure we're quick in the wet? And that applied to Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull, but not McLaren. And I think that's probably, if I think about it, it's probably even more significant in terms of where we are in 2025.
The operating window of that MCL 3.9, Peter, is broader than the rest. It's not even close. It's a difference in extents and not kinds now. It's not even close, Peter. And I felt sorry ever so slightly for Max on the back of what I thought was an absolutely astounding qualifying lap. Talk to me about Max's qualifying lap, because nobody saw that coming. I almost feel it's a pity on the back of the race and the Lando and the Oscar, and that almost Max's qualifying performance gets lost in the roundings and nobody even mentions it. What did you make of Max's quali lap?
Oh, absolutely one of the best he's ever driven. And given what I just said about how light Red Bull were running, they were running a dry setup, obviously, and how significant their advantage was over the McLaren in the straight line, not over Ferrari and Mercedes. So let's not get carried away here. They were running about the same relative downforce as Ferrari and Mercedes. But who was quickest through Copse Corner on that last phase of Q3? Max Verstappen. Not a massive amount of downforce in the car. He was quicker than both McLarens through Copse. What does that tell you about Max Verstappen? And he was lifting slightly, just slightly feathering it. The two McLaren drivers, absolutely flat. But because they don't quite have the finesse of Max in the initial turn-in, which then obviously is a factor when it comes to tyre scrub as you're going into Copse at very high speed, over 180 miles an hour. Because Max is absolutely fingertip perfect in everything he did, he was quicker, even though he was lifting slightly because he didn't have enough downforce in the car. I mean, that to me, that shows that Max is here at the moment and everybody else is a little bit lower. Charles, I think, was overdriving most of Silverstone. I don't know why. Maybe it goes back to that shunt in Canada and he's just so annoyed with himself. I don't know what, but he seemed to be overdriving on most of the quick corners, and Lewis had him on the slow stuff. So and then you've got George, who was always saying that he didn't have right tire temperature, but when it was cooler, yeah, he was a bit quicker, but not in Max's class in terms of what Max was doing with that car. I think what he did in Copse was one of the best things I've seen for a long, long time in Formula One. And he did it, as I said, he did it in the draft of Kimi Antonelli. No complaints about dirty air at all. Nothing. No, no. I've got a toe coming out. Tell Charles Leclerc about that. You know, when was it Isaac Hadjar that went off? No, sorry, that
Yeah,
caused the dirty air when he went off
yeah,
in
it was
Canada.
Hajar. Yeah,
The gaps were about the same.
yeah, yeah.
It's quicker corner cops, much quicker.
It's there are levels to this thing they call F1, Peter. But then, I mean, Max Verstappen could go on to do great things, right? He might win a couple of championships if he keeps his nose. If he keeps his nose clean going forward. However, Peter, he goes and makes an uncharacteristic error. Well, I mean, people pointed at, again, Canada, wasn't it, when he made a similar error, but then caught it on a safety car restart. Was that just Max being human? Was that him trying to climb a mountain that was just too steep, trying to work around an RB21 with low downforce in changeable conditions? Do you just chalk that up to the F1 game per se?
Yeah, it's no tire temperature with not a lot of downforce on the car, frustration, tires going off, the car very, very difficult to drive, and just giving it a bit too much throttle. You know, I don't see it as a massive mistake. He held it all right, didn't hit anything, and kept going. You know, big deal. It was pretty where he was and what was going to happen. There's no way Lando wasn't going to pass him anyway. So I don't hold that against him really. I mean, it was just one of those stupid things. I mean, do we hold it against Fernando that he lost it at Nürburgring that time when he's zigzagging and spins? And what about David Coulthard? Was it Monza Italian Grand Prix when he crashed into the guardrail, or was it Melbourne, Adelaide maybe? One of them anyway. He came in and crashed into the guardrail on the entry to the pit lane, didn't he, during the race? No penalty.
People make mistakes, but it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they make mistakes. And when it's cold tires and it's flick oversteer, it doesn't matter whether you're Max Verstappen or Yuki Tsunoda, you know, you're not going to catch it.
It is weird though, Peter, seeing you just expect Max to correct it at this stage. Seeing him completely spin out, I'm like, I feel like I'm in the Matrix. Like
but when it's very slow speed and it's cold tires and there's no grip, what's he got to correct it with? You know, he can't balance it on the throttle because it's very slow speed, and it's, you know, opposite lock's not going to help at that point. Yeah. So it's just on ice. So what's, you know, that's like not a car control thing at all. If that had happened at, you know, proper somewhere near racing speed, for sure he would have held it. Absolutely no doubt. But it's just a ridiculous thing on ice going 3 miles an hour, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the reason why he was trying to give.
It's not a big deal. It doesn't in any way impact on Max's talent or his thing. And that was just a function of how bad the Red Bull was in those tires and those conditions when the temperatures went away. Well, even when he had temperature, it was bad, but let alone without temperature.
It was bad. It was very, very bad. Go on, Mr. Windsor. Talk to me about Scuderia Ferrari, because there's been a lot of talk post the British Grand Prix. In particular, the Gazzetta dello Sport came out and their headline read something like, "It's time to listen to the champion in the team, Sir Lewis Hamilton." That in 2026, they want to start disregarding all of Charles Leclerc's feedback and pay attention to Lewis. And that in effect, unwritten, but pointedly, that invest more in Sir Lewis Hamilton PLC than they're doing in Charles Leclerc. What do you think of that? Is that the way forward for Scuderia Ferrari?
Well, I said as much in my video after Austria, that hopefully with Lewis having proved his point in Austria that he should have stayed out and he wanted to stay out, they should listen to the driver and respect him. He's the guy driving the car. He knows the condition of his tires. He's got a feel more than anybody else on the pit wall about whether those tires might last to the end and whether he can do a one-stop strategy. And they should have listened to him. And I made that point very clear. I don't, however, think they should stop listening to Charles Leclerc. I think that's where, is it Gazzetta dello Sport got it wrong? Or I think that's where they get it wrong. I mean, why would you only listen to one driver? The point is, at the moment, until Silverstone, they were mainly listening to Charles and not Lewis, quite clearly, because there have been several incidents where he said, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And my hope was that after Austria, Lewis would have said to them, and I guess he might have, look, you know, I've had enough now. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm the driver. I have won a few world championships. I know what I'm talking about. I'm the guy with the 4 tires on the road. I know the feel. And if I say to you, the tires feel good, respect that. And I suspect that conversation did take place. And I think we saw that at Silverstone. I think they were listening to him. And I think that's why he got quite a good result. But I don't think they should stop listening to Charles. Why would they? I mean, Charles pretty quick and pretty good at what he wants, and he's not as if he's going in a completely different direction to Lewis Hamilton. Ultimately, they both drive in a very similar way. Lewis is starting to look pretty good on slow corners, and I think around Hungary, which is the race after Spa coming up, I think it's a double header, isn't it? I think Hungary will go quite well on slow corners. I don't know how well he'll go okay in a race at Spa. I think through fast corners, Charles will still have him. And it was pretty clear at Silverstone, Charles still, the quick guy on quick corners compared with Lewis. But Lewis has got a massive amount he can bring to the team and a massive amount of understanding and feel in terms of time management and getting the best from the car, particularly on slow corners. And they need to combine all of that. They don't need to do one at the expense of the other. That's nonsense.
I suppose, Mr. Windsor, the devil's advocate case is that Lewis knows what good looks like. He was with Mercedes and he won the 6 championships, 8 constructors with the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. And that Charles Leclerc isn't as brilliant as he is in the car, as fast as he is point A to point B. He's never necessarily been the technical feedback guy, and he doesn't know what championship winning good looks like. So then I suppose, why wouldn't you go overweight, put all of your eggs in the Lewis Hamilton design philosophy basket as versus Charles Leclerc, who is as yet unproven in that aspect?
Well, yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't think Lewis, Charles, or Max are known for their technical expertise. If they were, why was the Mercedes such a dog over the last 3 or 4 years? No, the quality that those 3 have actually is that they're not that technical. They're just very, very good at feeling the car, feeling the surface of the road, and telling the engineers what they need in order to be quick and what they can live with and where the compromises can be made. Whereas lesser drivers tend to just focus on everything that's wrong. I've got too much understeer. And they get rid of the understeer. And now he's got no traction or whatever it is. But before a guy like Lewis or Max or Charles opens his mouth and complains about understeer, they're already thinking about, and how would I live with if I compromises my exit from Beckett's, how would I live with that? And that's a sign of a great Grand Prix driver. So I don't think there's much difference between them. It's too journalistic, a 2025 spec, to start being that focused on different drivers and what they can bring to the team. Bottom line, Charles Leclerc is an unbelievably fast and good Grand Prix driver and should be listened to at all times. Bottom line, Lewis Hamilton, exactly the same. And Ferrari are very lucky to have both those two and combine all that information and manage it well, as Fred Vasseur should be able to do when he's chairing the debrief meetings. And you've got a great combination. Now, whether all that happens is another matter, of course, but that's how it should be. And I think the change is that they will be, hopefully, they're now listening to Lewis a lot more than they were.
So I think they're going to come. I agree with you, Peter, but I think they're going to. They need to make some changes, even if it's just false seeming, because the problem for them is that they're competing for second in the championship with Mercedes, who have one driver as a rookie in Kimi Antonelli, with Red Bull, who have one driver that's accruing any points. Yuki Tsunoda now, I don't think has made the top 10 for the last 4 races, I want to say. And so ostensibly the optics for Ferrari are really bad. And especially, I suppose the broader context is that they finished 14 points adrift of McLaren in the Constructors last year. And then now, I think they're on 222 points, 238 points adrift of McLaren. And how do you go, stakeholder being your favourite word, Peter, how do you go into an annual general meeting if you're, I don't know, Frederick Vasseur or John Elkann and justify that year-on-year drop-off? I think they have to make a chat, like maybe not this year, but at the start of 2026, I think they need to start bringing home some kind of paradigm shift-esque changes.
Well, I don't know what to say to that, really. I mean, you don't need all those stats to know that Ferrari don't have a very good car. McLaren, bottom line, they don't have a good enough car. Nothing to do with the drivers. Probably something to do with middle management. A lot to do with top-end management. But they don't have a good car. and that reflects on the engineering team. And they bypassed Adrian Newey and decided to stick with the team they've got, and they haven't got a very good car. Too late to do anything about that now. A bit like a 10-second stop-go penalty. Too late. Damage is done. He's now at Aston Martin. So all you can do, rather than throw the prams throw the toys out of the pram, is just continue to do what they're doing and build on the team they've got and try to get the best from them and respect their abilities, create some harmony. The last thing because it's no good saying, well, they got to make a change. Well, what change? They want a better car. What are you going to do? Buy a McLaren or something? It's easy to say, oh, you got to have a change at Ferrari. They're not doing very well. But bottom line is they chose this path. Work with it now. Get the best from the people and work with it. And if you've got good people in there, and I keep saying good people, but by which I mean managers that get the best from their team, that don't put pressure in the wrong way, that make sure all the round pegs are fitting into round holes, that somebody who's got some sort of private family problem is looked after. All these things, all these human things add up and count when it comes to good management. And some teams are doing it very well. Quite clearly, Ferrari are not getting the best from their engineering team, quite clearly. And we know that it doesn't have to be Adrian Newey. I mean, look at Sauber with the same engine. Now they've got a decent manager in there, Jonathan Wheatley, working with Matteo Binotto, giving Binotto the sort of spark that he needs in order to move forward. And Binotto's got very good technical feel as well. And it's a good combination. So, that's working really well. They haven't changed too much. They've just got the people working in the right direction. That's all that needs to happen at Ferrari. And I keep saying, I imagined that Fred Vasseur would be able to do all of that he was sort of Jonathan Wheatley 2.0. But at the moment, the evidence is that he's not that. But the solution is not to get rid of him and put somebody else in. The solution is to make sure that he understands where he's got to go and how he's got to do a better job with people. Maybe he needs a guy alongside him who's maybe a better person manager, I don't know, people manager, but I don't know enough about the Ferrari politics. I don't think anybody does what goes on behind those closed walls. I mean, I suppose you could say that Lewis, with these 7 world championships, should be able to say to Ferrari, I want this guy in alongside Freddie. He's going to do a really good job. He worked with me at Mercedes. I know him well. We've got to get him. And I wonder whether Lewis is doing that. That's one area where his long experience with the teams would count, that he knows these people in the same way that Michael knew all the good Benetton guys and took them to Ferrari. And I'm not sure Lewis really thinks that way, though. He's a different sort of guy, isn't he? Vettel didn't think that way. Lewis doesn't really think that way. He just thinks, I'm Lewis Hamilton and I'll make this work, sort of thing. And it's not enough. You've really got to look at a granular way at all the people around you. But getting rid of Fred, I don't think is the answer. And certainly making a quantum leap in some direction is not the answer either. It's all about organic growth. And we see that at McLaren, we see that at Sauber now, and we see it at Haas to some extent. Well, especially at Haas, I think.
So go on then, Mr. Windsor. I remember once upon a time, me and a good friend had a conversation, and that friend, who will remain unnamed, suggested that Carlos Sainz should go to Sauber, soon to become Audi. At which point I thought my friend had lost his mind, that he should build a team up in his own image and that Audi would give him the length and breadth to do that. Carlos Sainz is now struggling at Williams. Why don't you think... let me ask you the question this way, Peter. Surely it can't just be Jonathan Wheatley that's led to the uptick in performance at Sauber. Surely not. There's got to be other things. It can't just be Binotto. There's lead time to this sort of stuff. You don't just put good people in place and then all of a sudden Hulkenberg, who's never won a podium in his life in 15 years in F1, starts making podiums. So correlation and does not necessarily imply causation, or does it, Peter?
Well, it is as simple as that. It is about people. There's no magic in Formula One. It's all about getting the best from good people. And there are good people in every team. But how you get them to operate and interface with their colleagues, that's what it's all about, and the exchange of information. Providing you've got somebody at the top of that group that can filter that information in the right direction and use it correctly, which a lot of people in that position in Formula One are capable of doing, you're going to be okay. And it's only when you've got dictatorial management telling you that things have to be done this way, and a lack of communication from one end of the drawing office to the other, or the engineering office to the other, that the problems arise. And my gut feel always was that Jonathan Wheatley has a very, very good touch when it comes to standing in the pit lane and knowing what Formula One and motor racing is all about, and to some extent, knowing what drivers are all about. You know, he was the guy that looked Daniel Ricciardo in the eye when Daniel said he was going to leave Red Bull and said, Daniel, you're making the biggest mistake in your career. If you stay with us, I promise you we're going to win more Grand Prix with you. And you could even win a world championship. Do not make this mistake. You'll never, ever recover from it. And that shows that he knows quite a lot about drivers. And Daniel didn't listen to him, of course, and went away. But he was right. He's absolutely right. And I don't know, I don't know every day how it operates, but Jonathan Wheatley for me is a guy I've always been slightly wary of, because he's so bright, and I'm very worried about asking a stupid question in his presence, because he can snap back at you if you ask a stupid question, and that's good. You know, he's a racer. He's a Formula One guy of the old school that doesn't have time really for all that nonsense. He just gets on with it, with the key things that matter. Whereas I think Binotto is a bit of a sort of, he's a bit sort of wishy-washy in terms of personnel, but he's got a very good engineering brain. And immediately Jonathan would have twigged that. So, right, I'm going to get this guy to focus 100% on what's wrong with the car and how we're going to do this. I'll take care of all the other stuff. And there's a really good combination. So it is as simple as that. And that's why, for me, that was the obvious place for Carlos Sainz to go. I've got to say, I don't think you should underplay the role of Nico Hülkenberg in all of this either, because he's a star. Whether he's had any podium finishes to his credit before he joined Sauber was irrelevant. He is a star. He's Nico Hülkenberg. He walks into a room, people think, oh, wow, that's Nico Hülkenberg. And that's a big effect. But he's got a personality. He's got a very strong personality. And I think that has been a big energy drive at Sauber as well. So don't underplay that. I'm not saying he's been there saying, fix this, do that, I want more camber at the rear, whatever. I think he's just a good race driver that's saying, give me the car, I can do it. And he probably spends a lot of time with the guys and girls, men and women in the factory, doing what racing drivers should do. And he's a very good man. So there was that. And that was another reason for Carlos Sainz to go there. The anchor man would have been Nico Hülkenberg, and there was Carlos Sainz floating in from his Grand Prix wins at Ferrari, probably with a really big deal with Audi in terms of badging and branding for the next decade or whatever. Great face for Audi. Instead of which he goes to Williams, where he's got to beat, even if the car's any good, he's still got to beat Alex Albon. I just don't get it. Only because in the last couple of races, actually in the last race, I think Sauber ahead of Williams, but of 2024. But in general, they would have looked at the season and said, oh no, Williams have got a better car, better go there. Talk about short-term thinking.
It's inspired that Mr. Windsor would call that out ahead of time. Is inspired. I think this is like Lewis leaving McLaren to go to Mercedes. With the benefit of hindsight, everybody can be a god tier Monday morning quarterback, but you've got to be very brave and or educated to call that out in real time, Peter. I thought Carlos Sainz, there was no way that he should go to Sauber. Like, what, Sauber? At the time, they were like drop dead last. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, look at the two personalities of Valtteri Bottas. Really good guy, very good racing driver. Nico Hülkenberg, I mean, he's a completely different sort of person. Yeah. He's energy. He's, what's happening today? It's all up, up, up. And that's great. And we go back to Lewis. I mean, I was one of the guys that said I thought he was making a mistake and he should stay at McLaren. I'm happy to put my hand up and say that, because I'm by no means perfect, that's for sure. And if he had stayed at McLaren, he probably still would have been okay for a year or two. But yeah, Mercedes long term was a very good move for him, wasn't it? So there we go. One thing I'd like to talk about is the shunt between Isaac Hadjar and Kimi Antonelli going into Cops. And we know how quick that is. Yeah. And we know how bad the visibility was. We could see it from the onboards. It was absolutely appalling. And I mentioned in my video last night, that Nigel Mansell had a similar situation in the 85 Portuguese Grand Prix, driving from the pit lane through the field, passing cars the whole time in the wet. Got very little credit. All the spotlight was on Ayrton Senna, who won the race, basically on a clear road because he had nobody in front of him, which he'd earned. But Nigel was driving through the field and passed all these cars, no mistakes, in a car that Keke found undrivable with an on-off switch for a throttle pedal, basically, with terrible throttle lag, turbo. But anyway, I made the point that I spoke to Nigel after that race, and he said, I said, how did you pass all those guys? And he said, well, I would basically sit behind them and then wait until the engine note died, and I knew that they were then approaching the corner. I basically knew it was going to be a left or a right-hander, and then I moved either left or right, knowing that that was the moment to pass, and then I outbrake them, which he made, sound pretty simple, but obviously massively difficult thing to do. But it just occurred to me this morning, actually, I was thinking about that. The reason that Isaac Hadjar probably didn't do that, why? Because the 2025 Formula One cars don't make as much noise.
Yeah. Good shout.
And there's a thing, you see, we all these things about we're making safer and better, quieter cars. You can't actually do what Nigel Mansell did in Portugal '85 and listen to the engine note of the car in front. I may be wrong there, but I'm not sure. I mean, if you ever heard any audio of what it's like on board, of how much engine noise you can hear of the car in front in Formula One, it's quite difficult to hear that, isn't it?
Yeah, no.
But my guess is that it's in the wet like that, you probably don't hear the engine note anything like as clearly of the car in front as Nigel could in 1985. And there's Formula One now with its hybrid engines going even more electric next year. Engines probably be even quieter. And that safety element, if you like, has gone away completely. And nobody even talks about that.
Yeah, it's a very good shout. We're heading in the wrong direction sometimes, Peter, as far as F1 and the regulations.
Yeah, and there's something else I'd just like to say as well. I don't know how many people are aware of it, but there's a new rule now. Well, not a new rule, but I think it's protocol that when there's a shunt like that, the driver, I think, has to spend something like 20 minutes, if not 30, with a doctor in a medical center. And nobody else is allowed to be there. It's just like a sort of, observation period. And only because I've experienced that moment, I don't know, at least 10 times in my life of a driver that I'm quite close to having had a massive shunt and being taken to the medical center, and none of us being exactly sure what it's like. But in those, to have a 30-minute period or 25-minute cooling period just with the doctor and no information coming out at all, I think is not very good for the family and the people close to that driver. It was quite a difficult moment when Isaac went into the medical center there, and that is the protocol, I know. But I think we need to do a little bit more there to make sure the families and the close team members are all kind of reassured of what's going on.
Bravo, Mr. Windsor, very well said. And again, this is your you don't get this sort of information. I mean, you can't watch Drive to Survive and understand these nuanced narratives about which you speak so eloquently.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just always very wary in those situations when somebody's had a big knock like that. But noise, it's a good point, isn't it? If if they had a noisier engine, would Hadjar have got the message and been able to move?
Good shout. It's a brilliant shout. It's a point that I hadn't considered. Bring back V10s, said Mohammed.
Well, bring back V10s, V8s, bring back
something that makes noise.
Bring back 1.6 litre turbos, whatever you want to do.
Something that makes a noise that would make you feel. As you round third base, Mr. Windsor, it would be remiss of me not to ask you this question. There's a lot of talk about Maximilian Verstappen's future. I know we spoke about it last time, but now more than ever, there's talk about 2 performance clauses in his contract. One around his position in the Drivers' Championship. Some say if he's outside of the top 2, some say if he's outside of the top 3, that there's a performance clause in his Red Bull contract which comes to its expiration, supposed to, as at 2028. If Max is outside of the top 2, that he can null and void his contract with immediate effect. In the second instance, rumour, speculation that there's another performance clause that speaks to the Constructors' Championship. And if Red Bull are outside of the top 3, that Maximilian Verstappen can null and void his contract. Toto's come out and said that they're having conversations with Max Verstappen. George Russell has rubber stamped that Max doesn't want to be drawn on it. You said last time that Maximilian Verstappen, if he's had his Weetabix and he's making sensible decisions, that Aston Martin should be front and centre of his mind as far as 2026 or 2027. Do you think that Max, given what Mercedes have to offer as far as their power unit, expediting for their learning curve, fresh in the mind is what they did in 2014 around the split turbo hybrid, do you think the probability of Max joining Mercedes is now doing one of these, and what's something that we need to consider seriously?
Well, I made those comments about Aston Martin specifically in response to, I think, your suggestion from the community that Max would be free to leave at the end of 2025. And I said that if that's the case, and none of us know what the 26 lineup's going to be, Aston Martin could have a great car, could have a terrible car. Same applies to Mercedes or Ferrari or Red Bull. If that's the case, the team with the least downside is probably Aston Martin because of Adrian Newey and Andy Cowell and Honda and the money. That's for 26. If he has to take a gamble, that's the gamble with the least downside, in my opinion. If, however, he does what is logical and sees how good the Red Bull is in 26, and it's not very good, but then he's got a chance to look at all the other teams, he should go to the team that is doing the best job in 2026. Could be that Ferrari have a car like the McLaren this year, it's a second lap quicker than everybody else and disappearing into the distance. And Ferrari are then on the phone to him saying, would you like to join us for 27? What's he going to say? So at this point, it's ludicrous to say, oh, you got to go to Mercedes because there's a great warm feeling there, and Toto and Fangio and Lewis and all the rest of it, Nico Rosberg, got to go there, Max, because nobody knows what Mercedes is going to be like in 2026. They could be brilliant, in which case, yeah, go there, no problem. But the logical thing for him, in my opinion, is to do 26 with Red Bull and see what the position is with all these new cars and engines that nobody knows anything about, and then make your decision halfway through 26. Yeah. He's in a perfect position. Everyone's going to wait and dance attendance around Max. And of course, Toto's talking to him. Of course, everyone will be talking to him, probably even Ferrari. And so he'll be chatting to them. It's nice to chat to other teams. Why not? But he knows also that Red Bull might have a good car. They might. They might not, but they might. So that's what he should be doing. And if he wants to leave at the end of 25, because he's so annoyed with the way it's gone, and he can leave legally, then the logical team to go to would be Aston Martin, in my opinion. Just a one-year deal, just see how it goes, because with Adrian and Andy Cowell, there's half a chance they'll have a pretty good car.
Talk to me about George Russell very quickly, Peter, because a lot of George Russell fans are claiming that Toto, these things happen, and F1's always been a piranha tank, and negotiations and contracts and all these behind door deals, etc., etc. But a lot of George Russell fans are saying, well, George has been brilliant this year. He's your guy, Toto. So how very dare you belittle and disrespect a young, hungry lion in George with a 1+1 deal? What's that about? Clearly, Toto's desperate to get himself a Max Verstappen, and despite what he says before the world's press and media, he's no longer overweight George Russell PLC. What do you make of that? Do you feel like is that just business, or is he being a tad disrespectful of the person who's meant to be his mentee?
Well, the only way to answer that question is try to imagine you're Toto Wolff, which quite difficult. But trying to imagine that situation, I would think, of course, I want to have Max Verstappen. He's better than George, and I'm very loyal to George, and he's very, very good. And I don't have to worry about him, because if I take Max, for sure, George will go to Red Bull. So why would I worry about loyalty when it comes to having Max? I know that George is going to be fine at Red Bull. That's the way I would think, isn't it? And that's what would happen too, isn't it? I mean, who else would Red Bull get?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a question of be loyal. If the guy you've created and given the opportunity to ends up in a Red Bull, it's not exactly a terrible thing, is it? But I think more important was what was going on with Mercedes. I mean, throughout Friday they were whinging about the hot temperatures. Then it gets cooler, and they do a reasonable job in qualifying. And then in race conditions, it's lovely and cool, and they put hards on the car. What's that all about? I just don't get it. They think that the mediums, they still would have been overheating or something, or what? They had mediums there. They had the same number of mediums as everybody else, and they ran 2 sets of hards on George's car. And then, I couldn't get any tire temperature. Tire's too cold. What is it with the temperatures and Mercedes? Why are they going on and on about temperatures all the time? I know it's very easy to say, oh, well, the tires overheat on the Mercedes faster, but it's not a temperature issue. It's why the tires overheat and the way they're being used. That is the problem. It's nothing to do with the ambience. Of course, the ambience then are the result of the problems in the car, and they exacerbate them. But the real issue is why the temperatures go like that on the Mercedes. But they tend to go from race to race talking about, oh, well, it was too hot for us, or it was too cold for us, it was too wet for us. And it's such a shame, because George is the sort of driver that could have won that race, really, isn't he? Right. And it brings back to my other point, which I made yesterday, which I want to bang on about a bit here. And that is that if George is half thinking, I want to be on slicks, I can see myself on slicks, everybody else on inters, and I go through and win this British Grand Prix or get onto the podium from where I am. If he's thinking that way, why doesn't he take the plunge and do it on the grid? Why does he do it after the end of the formation lap? I don't get that. Why does so many people not take the plunge and do it on the grid? And it's very good saying, oh, well, the conditions change and the next chance they get to see is a formation lap. Well, I'm sorry, Mercedes have enough people to be able to employ them to stand around the track and be on radios constantly and tell them what the conditions are like. You don't need to do the lap in order to feel it. You just need lots of observers out there giving the info to the drivers on the grid. Instead of faffing around doing interviews and stuff, that's what they should be focusing on. And they should be changing tires on the grid at the last minute. Dramatic change. George is starting on slicks, mega thing.
Peter,
I'm not saying it was the right call, but I'm just saying if you're going to make that call, do it on the grid rather than on the formation lap.
I might be talking out of turn here, but I think that was a mandatory inter start. I think the rules are that they all had to start on inters, and that's why you had after one lap.
Oh, well, maybe you've got me there.
I don't know.
I didn't see a thing saying a declared wet start. I didn't see that, but maybe that's what it was.
Maybe I think that might be it. And if I'm going to defend George for a second, I know George is he considers himself to be a 4D level chess player of a strategist. But my criticism of George is that sometimes he's too quick to play a joker. Sometimes the best move is no move. And George is always looking to play, do you know what I mean? The Queen's Sacrifice or whatever, the sexy move. And I think he kind of did that yesterday. But it would have come off, Peter, but for the safety car. George says that they had 25 laps that they wanted to do on those hards, 15 of which were under safety car. And that curtailed their stint and the time that they figured that they would have gained. But there was I can hear you already, Peter. There was always going to be a couple safety cars, right? So you were never going to get a 25 lap stint uninterrupted.
In terms of knowing the right strategy, just look at Nico Hülkenberg. He just ran a mega long stint on intermediates and made him last, and that's how he got to P3. And that's all you need to do instead of trying to second guess the weather. Just whatever you got, live with it. I'm not saying that it was right or wrong to go to slicks. All I'm saying is that anyway. I think George, as I say, is the sort of driver in those conditions that he can ham-fist his way through a race in a very gentle way, if you like, and do a very good job of thinking ahead and being there when it mattered. But he was all over the place, wasn't he?
Yeah,
temperature.
He's always trying to do. He's a bit too contrarian all the time, and sometimes the median strategy or the mean is the right one to be on, and you might not go and do a Spa-Francorchamps in 24 and win a race and then go and get this. Do you know what I mean? But sometimes it's got to be the Alain Prost, slow, steady, the tortoise beats the hare, and he's always obsessed with 25 points, win it or bin it, and that's not the way. I don't think that he'll win a championship. He's got to peg that back, I think.
I'm interested to know from your community, in the same way that the community is hugely split between, say, Lewis and Max, is the community hugely split between George and Lando?
I don't think, if I'm honest, I don't think George is incredibly liked as a personality. Not the same way that Lando. I mean, Lando's a cheeky chappy and everybody loves him. You saw that the British Grand Prix contingent were full send on Lando's support. But George is a bit more, I don't want to say he's Marmite, but he's memeable. George is the dude on Drive to Survive that's going to go and ask for a coffee. And when he's asked what milk, he's going to say any milk. And that instant he's going to go viral, like, what? Just say a milk, George. So he's a bit, I don't know. He's divisive a figure, is George. Whereas everybody loves Lando because he's lovely and cheeky and he's got a good soundbite in him. But there's something to George, not to mention the fact that he gave Lewis Hamilton nightmares for 3 seasons, beating Lewis two of those 3. When lots of Lewis Hamilton fans, myself included to an extent, Peter, expected Lewis to go in there and be supported by second driver rear gunner George Russell. So I don't, really? I don't think the community is too fond.
I think if it had been Valtteri Bottas, you would have been correct. But that was why Lewis didn't want George. Why he wanted to keep on.
He's a killer. He's not a bad driver, that George, and love him or hate him, you've got to respect him. One of the best thus far this season, I would put forth. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as per usual, super generous of your time. I find these chats very edifying always and super educational. If you find these conversations and Peter D. Windsor's God tier level purple sector F1 insight as insightful as I do, then get yourself over to Peter's YouTube channel, Peter Windsor. Like, subscribe, watch yourself some videos, learn something about F1. Shortly thereafter, go over to your favourite podcasting platform, Short Corners Podcast by Peter D. Windsor. Like, follow, 5 stars as review. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, like, follow, subscribe, all of that gubbins, share with an F1 friend. And if you're listening to this on a podcasting platforms, 5 stars would go down a treat. Between now and next time, you guys have been legends. Thank you so much, Peter Windsor. As always, legendary settings. Between now and next time, gang, remember to look but never stare.